Hi, I'm Caitlin Horrocks. I'm a writer here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I'm the author of the Vexations, which was selected for this summer's Grand Rapids Public Library's GR Reads program. This book is historical fiction. It's based on the life of Eric Satie, the French composer. But in discussion with the library, what we had hoped to offer in terms of programming is a writing workshop that would be useful to fiction writers of all kinds. Whatever your project, whatever your experience level, whatever your area of interest, that you could sort of come and take something from it. Obviously, we can't meet in person this summer, so the adaptation is I'm recording a few short videos where I'm looking at just sort of big picture ideas in fiction, kind of major techniques that have been useful to me, and that I think are useful to writers of pretty much whatever you're doing in your fiction. These are things that I hope give you something to think about, something to take away from, something to steal and walk away with to your own work. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at a short piece of published writing that I think operates really effectively. If we were in person, I would ask for your observations and we would bounce those off of each other. In this format, you're just going to hear me picking out some highlights. And then we'll zoom out to sort of see what some of those stealable techniques are. And then we'll end with a writing exercise. And that exercise is something that you can pause the instructions on your screen and do right now, or could come back to at whatever time is convenient for you. What we're looking at, it feels like a lot. I'm referring to it as a setting, description, and perspective. And the reason that I've stuck those very large things together is that when we talk about writing about place or writing about setting, it's easy for that to sound boring, for that to sound like, you as a writer are just being asked to string some attractive sentences together to give us kind of a picture postcard version of a particular place. And what I want to urge everyone to think about, whenever you are writing place, or, whether that's a very distinctive small town or a area of great wilderness, or a character, entering their living room for like the 100th time. The 100th time that day, maybe they've been in quarantine since March and their living room is feeling oppressive to them. Who is that entering that space? What is that person's relationship with that space? What is that person's relationship to language? What are the words that they would use to describe that space? Who are they describing that space to or for? Ideally any kind of passage of writing where you're getting a description of a room or a space or an event or a journey, you're learning about the place, but you're also learning about the person and what the person is noticing and finds important. So what I think is a beautiful example of this comes in a very short piece called The Colonel by Caitlin Horrocks. We're going to listen to her read it, so you get a break from my voice. And then you'll hear me talking about the piece. She's going to give her own kind of content heads up that the piece includes an obscenity, and I will just affirm that it does. There's a linguistic obscenity, and then it also depicts a pretty brutal act. This is not a cheerful piece of writing.
This poem is a documentary poem. It comes from May 1978 in San Salvador, El Salvador. It contains an obscenity. I feel I should announce that in advance. I believe it contains actually 2 obscenities. The Colonel. What you have heard is true. I was in his house. His wife carried a tray of coffee and sugar. His daughter filed her nails. His son went out for the night. There were daily papers, pet dogs, a pistol on the cushion beside him. The moon swung bare on its black cord over the house. On the television was a cop show. It was in English. Broken bottles were embedded in the walls around the house to scoop the kneecaps from a man's legs or cut his hands to lace. On the windows there were gratings like those in liquor stores. We had dinner. Rack of lamb, good wine. A gold bell was on the table for calling the maid. The maid brought green mangoes, salt, a type of bread. I was asked how I enjoyed the country. There was a brief commercial in Spanish. His wife took everything away. There was some talk then of how difficult it had become to govern. The parrot said hello on the terrace. The colonel told it to shut up and pushed himself from the table. My friend said to me with his eyes, "Say nothing." The colonel returned with a sack used to bring groceries home. He spilled many human ears on the table. They were like dried peach halves. There is no other way to say this. He took one of them in his hands, shook it in our faces, dropped it into a water glass. It came alive there. "I am tired of fooling around," he said. "As for the rights of anyone, tell your people they can go fuck themselves." He swept the ears to the floor with his arm and held the last of his wine in the air. "Something for your poetry, no?" he said. Some of the ears on the floor caught the scrap of his voice. Some of the ears on the floor were pressed to the ground.
All right, that was our author speaking to us. So some things that I notice about this piece, and I could talk about this piece for a long time. I'm going to try and keep it short. She does introduce this as a documentary poem. Normally when we are reading poetry, we would never want to automatically assume that the I is the author, but certainly in many interviews and things outside this poem, she has identified it very clearly as something that happened, and that happened to her in El Salvador in 1978, as the poem says. "What you have heard is true. I was in his house." There's our starting point. Obviously, it's the first line. We are in the space of a paragraph going to end up with human ears on a table. This is a really short journey, but it is a journey to a harrowing place, to a really shocking place, to an image of great violence. And looking at how she as the author takes us there as the reader in this really compressed spot, from what at the beginning is a kind of very civilized dinner party. You know, his wife carried a tray of coffee and sugar, his daughter filed her nails, his son went out for the night. And when we think about the piece as a journey, one of the things I like to ask her to think about is kind of where does it get creepy for you as a reader? Where do you start to get a little bit worried for our author? And different readers will have that moment come at different times. I've had a reader tell me like, "Oh, I was worried from the first line," because it suggests that, you know, something happened in this house that wasn't ordinary, that maybe wasn't safe, that wasn't pleasant, that maybe you would want to disbelieve. Something happened that our author feels like she needs to insist really occurred. I was in his house, you know, not I was at home in sweatpants during quarantine. You know, I was somewhere else. I was in somebody else's space. He has a wife, daughter's filing her nails, son went out. Daily papers, pet dogs, a pistol on the cushion beside him. Usually a moment where the reader kind of pricks up their ears, whether or not this feels immediately threatening to us. It's a really, really powerfully selected detail. And it's not, the whole sentence is not about the pistol, we can notice. Daily papers, pet dogs, a pistol on the cushion beside him. Ordinary, all right, a little threatening. And it's not that it's in a drawer, it's not hidden, it's displayed in this very particular way. It is being, he's our host is performing a little bit for his guest and for us. The moon swung bare on its black cord over the house. I will say it is hard to make the moon sound creepy. When the moon shows up in a piece, 99 times out of 100, it's going to be sort of elegant or melancholy or moody or lovely. This is a pretty scary moon. And again, is kind of increasing our sense of being maybe ill at ease in this house, in this space. On the television was a cop show. It was in English. So something very ordinary, which suggests to us that the fact it merited explanation suggests that we are maybe not in a household or in a space where English would be the default language. We have been brought to a place where our narrator is noting the presence of English. And then you can note sort of, in addition to the fact that she's giving us this seemingly ordinary piece of information, she's doing it in very ordinary language. Things here are chosen with a lot of precision. Not necessarily, this is not an author who feels like she needs to offer up fireworks in every sentence, because that's not the mood of the piece. That's not what's necessary here. Broken bottles were embedded in the walls around the house to scoop the kneecaps from a man's legs or cut his hands to lace. Even when the language is straightforward, it's still really careful. It's still really, kneecap scoop, kneecaps, cut, hands, lace. It's still really careful, really precise. On the windows, there were gratings like those in liquor stores. This house is pretty well defended. And maybe these barriers that exist towards keeping people out are also keeping our narrator in. We don't know at this point, how freely she could leave. We had dinner. Rack of lamb, good wine, gold bell on the table for calling the maid. The maid brought green mangoes, salt, a type of bread. So we've gone from those bottles to like, oh, all right, like rack of lamb, nice wine, gold bell. There's this very posh dinner party, an unfolding inside these window gratings. And the maid bringing green mango salt, a type of bread. Our narrator isn't sure quite what to call it. So again, this beat of there's elements of threat, there's elements of luxury, and our narrator is sort of just trying to notice and observe and keep up and isn't always sure of the right words for things. I was asked how I enjoyed the country. Our narrator is a guest here from outside the country. Brief commercial in Spanish. All right, that's maybe the predominant language of wherever it is that we are in this piece. His wife took everything away. Some talk then of how difficult it had become to govern. Again, apart from the title, we have not been given particular information about who our host is. But here they appear to wield some power. They have opinions on what it might be like to govern or how difficult it is to govern. Parrot said hello on the terrace. The colonel told it to shut up. I'll just say, if you want to make a character seem unpleasant, having them be mean to an animal is about the fastest way to do it. Obviously, it's not great when characters are mean to other humans, which is where this is headed. But if you want to have somebody just immediately register as like, ugh, creeper, have them be mean to a pet or their own pet. It very quickly has that effect. My friend said to me with his eyes, say nothing. This is the first we've seen of the friend. I think we can note here just how much is left off the page. How much is Forché not telling us? It's not, my friend who had spent a lot of time here, my friend who had invited me for this reason, my friend whom I met in the 7th grade. All of that is absent. But there's this sense that the friend has a little bit of expertise of this space. The friend is communicating non-verbally, and the friend maybe has reason to think that this narrator is someone who might say something, who sometimes maybe needs to be prevented or stopped from saying a little too much. So in the space of this one short sentence, there's the existence of another person and this little interplay between the two of them about who knows what, who maybe needs to be stopped from doing something. The colonel returned with a sack used to bring groceries home. We're still in sort of what seems like the land of the ordinary, and she takes that beat. She doesn't give us the backstory with friend, but she chooses to describe the type of sack because it is so ordinary, because we can picture what this is like. And the fact that the bag seems ordinary makes it that much more shocking, what is inside it. And when she goes on to describe them, to describe the action, what he does with them, again, she doesn't have to force the horror down our throats. She doesn't have to do more than, explain sort of what has happened. There is no other way to say this. The action carries its own horror, its own weight. And she is, as shocked at witnessing it as anyone would be. And she's also a writer. She's also somebody who is watching this occur, who is carrying a message. He invites her to write about this, and she does. And she says, all right, and comes back with this poem. So thinking about the persona that gets created here, and what we can take from that, and from the ways that the description unfolds. So perspective. This particular dinner party, this particular event as seen by a particular person. Somebody who is foreign to this country, who is being hosted by, brought here by a friend and then hosted by somebody else. She is a writer. She is somebody who is not particularly comfortable in this space, but is going to notice things and carry that message back with her. Progression. We start from a relatively unthreatening place. There's the daughter filing her nails, coffee, sugar. There's nothing in that opening that leads us to think that we are headed towards the ears. We sort of hang on and get there, and the story takes us on a journey. Juxtaposition, daily papers, pet dogs, pistol on the cushion beside him. A lot of the details in the piece gain power from the way that they're combined with other things. Same, gold bell, rack of lamb, good wine. Those things take on more weight when they are in combination with things like the broken bottles or other details in the piece. Mystery suspense, but not too much confusion. Sometimes as writers, we get too in love with the idea of leaving the reader in the dark and parceling out kind of tiny breadcrumbs of information. And it's true that reveal of information is a really powerful way to build suspense and to pull the reader along with you. But something to be done carefully and done mindfully. If your reader's too confused, your reader's just going to feel fed up and walk away. So are you striking that balance of things where we have to wait to find out the answer and things where we feel kind of reasonably grounded? And one way she gets away with a degree of mystery here is she is in some ways as confused as we are. I mean, she knows what country she's in. The speaker knows certain things that we don't. But the speaker is also kind of wrong-footed through the whole piece, just kind of trying to, am I in danger? What is happening? What's going on here? Her own kind of tentativeness comes through to the reader in an honest way and not a manipulative way. I mean, fiction is all about manipulation, but you don't want your reader to feel that. And that's something else this piece does well. Showing versus telling is an incredibly old piece of fiction writing that you can punch lots of holes in. Sometimes absolutely you want to tell. But do note here, she is not pausing at any moment to be like, gosh, I felt really nervous. This was getting creepy. I felt very ill at ease here. I had been in the country for several weeks, blah, 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 blah. The flight over had been, a pain. She doesn't need information about her emotional state. She doesn't need to tell us certain things because we are getting it from the way that the evening is described to us. And then context. The kernel notable for being really stripped of quite a bit of traditional context. Again, we're not given a lot about what has brought her to this place in this moment. And that's a conscious choice. And a writer could make a very different choice to give us a great deal of backstory. You know, who, what, when, why, where, you know, are we? And just being, you know, sort of mindful, what is the larger context of your character's moment in this space? And how much of it does the reader need? Forshé decides that the reader needs very little. You could decide that the reader needs a lot more for you as a writer. So we arrive at an exercise to try some of this stuff out. Choose 3 numbers, each between 1 and 5. Do this now, don't cheat. And then those numbers correspond to a character, a place, and a relationship to that place. So as you look at sort of age and identity, as you look at the nature of the place, as you look at the character's relationship to that place, take a moment, think about how those things would interact, how those things would shape the character's experience of the place. And then write for a few minutes about the character entering, describing, interacting with this place. As I said, you could do this now. You could come back, you know, freeze your screen. You can come back and do it another time. And if you have any questions about anything, I guess, feel free to email me. All right, enjoy the exercise and thanks. Hi, I'm Caitlin Horrocks, and this is the second installment of our Grand Rapids Public Library virtual writing workshop. For this session, I wanted to talk about character, and I wanted to talk about it in a way that didn't fall into some of the kind of old boundaries that I often see people fall into when it comes to different types of fiction. I think sometimes people feel that there's kind of, you know, literary character, language-driven fiction, and then there's more action-oriented, more exciting or fast-paced fiction. And I really reject those boundaries. And I wanted us to look at character in some ways that I hope are useful to people, whatever their projects. So, something obvious and true. You are a 21st century writer, unless you're like a time traveler who has decided to watch this video, in which case, like, do something else better with your time travel time. It is 2020, and your readers have lots of choices. They can watch narrative on the screen. They can watch a movie. They can watch, you know, TV. They can play video games. I mean, that is a form of narrative. What are you offering them in your fiction that is different and successful for being fiction? What does fiction allow you to explore as a writer that is different than what you might be doing in another medium? And we could talk about any work of fiction, any aspect of a work of fiction from this angle, but I think it's really apparent when we talk about it for character. Fiction maybe famously is a place where interiority is easier to do than in other forms of narrative storytelling. So just that access to the reader's, to the character's head. Sometimes we see that with a lot of immediacy, like, you know, a first person stream of consciousness story, you know, Catcher in the Rye, Holden Caulfield, we're like right in his brain, you know, hearing the words that he uses and the ways that he sees things. But any work of fiction gives us really, really natural, immediate access to a character, unless the author is choosing not to use that particular tool in their toolbox. So this is a short excerpt from a short story called The Upholsterer by Desirée Zamorano. You could Google that name and title and get the full text at the Kenyon Review online. This is from pretty late in the story, and honestly, it's not going to make a ton of sense. I'm not going to kind of waste our time trying to fill you in on what else has been happening in the story to this point, because I'm going to zero in on a couple more specific things. He opened his eyes and became immediately disoriented. He was lying on his sofa, but no longer in his living room. He was in the bright outdoor sunshine. What kind of prank was this? Had someone moved him in his sleep? Was he drunk, medicated, having an attack of the nerves? So to pause, you could certainly show an actor kind of waking up and seeming disoriented or confused. But this particular set of questions is something that Zamorano is able to give us really easily here in the context of fiction. He blinked against the light up into an unfamiliar shade of blue sky. That it's unfamiliar is a detail that we receive via the medium here. Glancing around, he saw that he and the couch were propped against a building. He inhaled. There was no longer a trace of diesel, a whisper of salt. Okay, so if you wanted to, you could have an actor like sniffing really exaggeratedly, like, but you're not gonna get that sense of, not just what things smell like, but what they don't smell like. Here we have a character registering sensory information that is only available to us through words. I mean, obviously, like, fiction does not come with scratch and sniff. The effect here is also being created through the medium of language. But we have what it smells like, and we have what it doesn't smell like. He inhaled the scent of the earth and something familiar. When was the last time he had eaten this? He grasped a clump, inhaled, and chewed on a stalk. Hints of mint and cilantro. This was the taste of home. So again, in neither screen narrative nor fiction can you like literally eat and taste the taste. But Zamorano describes it for us, and then it goes a little bit farther to say, this was the taste of home. So this sensory information, the sense of what this means to the character, what it tastes like to the character, this is something that she is able to do because of fiction here. Again, I mean, you could have an actor be like, tastes like home. You probably wouldn't. He stood a little unevenly, and the view of the valley was like a blow to his sternum. He knew that valley from childhood, although the buildings and acres of fields must have exploded 4 times at least. He looked around wildly. He knew where he was, and he didn't care how he had gotten there. So we have somebody who has been transported to a landscape that he suddenly recognizes. He recognizes that it has also changed over time. And he doesn't recognize it in this kind of gentle, nostalgic way. He recognizes it like a blow to his sternum. So this is the event that's happening in the scene is something that you could film. But you would get a really different, more distant take on what the character is actually experiencing here. What are the smells? What are the sounds? What are the tastes? What does it remind him of? What are the questions that he has? That is coming to us really directly from our author. Another way to think about this is to think about a literary work that you enjoy that has also appeared on screen, and to think about what information is available to you, through an actor's appearance, through an actor's charisma, through the collaborative efforts of, the costumers and the scene design and setting decoration, and all those different parts that go into filmed narrative. So, with Game of Thrones, you have this sort of, famously, meticulous and, luxurious and effortful, settings and all the trappings of the story. What you have if you have that story on the page, you lose some things. You don't have. You've lost a lot of things, and there's a lot of pressure on the author then to make those things apparent on the page, and to put to use what he can do. So 15 years passed. When they had ridden forth to win a throne, the Lord of Storm's End had been clean-shaven, clear-eyed, and muscled. He'd had a giant strength, too, his weapon of choice a spiked iron warhammer that Ned could scarcely lift. In those days, the smell of leather and blood had clung to him like perfume. Now it was perfume that clung to him like perfume, and he had a girth to match his height. So a couple of things we see here. This is not just a static description of somebody's physicality. This is a character where we're getting a before and an after. One past selves and two other characters. We are seeing, this character looks one way now, used to look a different way. 15 years past, he had incredible physical strength. He had a great sense of purpose. Ned had a certain relationship with him at that time. Now it was perfume that clung to him like perfume, and he had a girth to match his height. Since the night they had stood side by side in Balin Greyjoy's fallen stronghold, this moment of triumph, the king had gained at least 8 stone. A beard as coarse and black as iron covered his jaw to hide his double chin and the sag of his royal jowls, but nothing could hide his stomach or the dark circles under his eyes. So there's a sense not just of like, oh gosh, he's put on weight since the glory days. He's tired, and there's a weakness here. There is a vulnerability that obviously is going to be extremely important as the book goes on, and it's a vulnerability that somebody in his position in his world cannot afford. And it's a vulnerability that Ned is very able to recognize because Ned has known him in both timelines. So sort of long, luxurious physical descriptions tend to, they're much less common, I would say, in most books now than they used to be. Readers are not always patient with them. But when you can do something that puts that in context, that shows us, all right, here's not just the way he looks, but here's how he used to look. Here's how he is seen. Here are ways in which this appearance is a problem, not an aesthetic problem, but a plot problem. Who has power? Who has agency? Where is this story going to go? George R. R. Martin, he doesn't have a showrunner. He doesn't have those other tools, but he has a sense of time and POV that are available to him and that he uses here. This is from a short story by Nafisa Thompson Spires from her collection Heads of the Colored People. And we can see another sort of thing that a fiction writer gets to do. It's an author commenting on character, putting character in context of a larger world and of readers' assumptions and expectations. So here's, Riley wore blue contact lenses and bleached his hair, which he worked with gel and a blow dryer and a flat iron some morning into Sonic the Hedgehog spikes so stiff you could prick your finger on them, and sometimes into a wispy side-swooped bob with long bangs. And he was black. But this wasn't any kind of self-hatred thing. He'd read The Bluest Eye and Invisible Man in school, and even picked up Disgruntled at a book fair. And yes, they were good, and there was some resonance in those books for him. But this story isn't about race or the shame of being alive or any of those things. He was not self-hating. He was even listening to Drake, though you could make it Fetty Wap if his appreciation for trap music changes something for you. Because all that's relevant here is that he wasn't against the music of his people or anything like that. As he walked down Figueroa with his earbuds pushed in just far enough so as not to feel itchy. So we end with a moment that probably almost any reader can relate to, the itchy earbuds. And here we have an author, again, it's not just physical description for the sake of physical description. Riley has blue contact lenses, bleaches his hair, there's gel, there's a blow dryer, like Sonic the Hedgehog is invoked, and he was black. We get that information, 5-6 lines in. But this wasn't any kind of self-hatred thing. Sorry, I went too far. He'd read these books and they were good and there was some resonance, but that's not who he is, and that's not what this story is. This story is not about whatever assumptions we're going to make about Riley. It's not about what we think, the focus of the story should be or is going to be, that it's not about race or shame. He's not self-hating. This is his style. This is his music. And whatever sort of contradictions the reader sees in that, Riley, this is Riley. And the reader is sort of asked to kind of step back and just take Riley on his own terms, and set aside whatever assumptions we might be leaping to make. Thompson Spires sort of steps forward to say, like, all right, here's this array of traits that I've given this character. Here's the ways in which I don't want you reading these. And let's agree on some things as we move forward. So fiction also gives you this really powerful opportunity as a writer to just kind of step forward and steer the reader, and comment on the information that you've chosen to give about a character. Obviously, there's tons of different things that a writer can do when we introduce a character. But this is just a taste of the type of things that, as fiction writers in an age of movies and TV and video games and comic books and all kinds of new possibilities for narrative, when you are sitting to write fiction, what does that allow you to do? What kinds of information does it allow you to share about the characters? And this whole passage here is something that, certainly you can have an actor being Riley looking like, doing the Sonic the Hedgehog hair. But the rest of this would be really difficult to do. And certainly not in the way that the author has done it here. So a writing exercise. Take a familiar story from mythology, fairy tale, folktale, fable, Shakespeare, maybe true history, and start retelling the story, making at least one of the following changes. A POV character who does not usually get to tell their side of the story. So this could be Cinderella from the prince's perspective. You could do a POV switch from the original. Cinderella's still our star, but we read about her in first person rather than third, using I rather than she, he, they, etc. Or C, a shift in psychic distance from the original. So example, Cinderella is still the star, but instead of, once upon a time or long ago and far away, there was a beautiful young girl whose mother had died and the father had remarried, to where we are like way, 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 way up in her head. This sort of like, oh, I want to go to the ball and I have to, clean up the house, and where you're strongly altering the psychic distance that we are from the characters. Most folktales, fairy tales have a lot of psychic distance. We're very far back from the characters. So if you want to try to retelling it where you are very deeply into the head, that would be something to try. So you could do this now. Of course, you can do this later. You could do this never. But I would ask you to write for a few minutes doing this, whether it feels like it's kind of going anywhere or not for you. And then step back, pause, and then ask yourself some of the following questions. What am I getting to explore here that I haven't seen in other versions of this story? What is the reader getting to explore or experience here that they won't have seen in other versions of this story? I do think as writers, we sometimes we can get tangled up if we start thinking about the reader too soon. We get in our own way, but I think thinking about the reader's experience is really important. And what sources of heat or tension do I see in the story so far? What doors have I opened for the story to walk through? Another way to think about it, this is sort of 3 ways of saying the same thing. Another way to think about it, if the story is a juggling act, what balls have you thrown up in the air so far that you could catch later? So if your answer to those questions as you look at what you've written is like, meh, I don't feel I'm exploring anything different than like the normal Cinderella story. I don't know that I'm offering the reader anything that different than the normal Cinderella story. I don't know that I've opened that many doors for myself. Then that's probably a piece, set it aside in good conscience. You did it and maybe it's not going anywhere very interesting for you. But if you do look at those questions and you're like, okay, like I haven't ever thought about this character in this way. I haven't ever thought about the story going in this direction. I think there's the potential here for the story to go in a direction that the reader hasn't seen it go before. Then that's both a good sign that maybe you could keep going with this piece, and it's a sign that you're leading into what fiction has to offer. Any art form, any mode of storytelling has its own opportunities and challenges. And I think part of being a fiction writer in our noisy world is thinking about, the books you love. What have those given to you? What particular type of storytelling experience have they offered? And how do we harness that as fiction writers? Not like, how do we write an action scene that might work better in another form? Not that fiction writers can't write great action, because they can. But make sure that you're not just sort of trying to imitate forms outside of fiction. Make sure that you're thinking about what fiction does and what fiction offers. Thanks. Hi, I'm Caitlin Horrocks, and this is our third installment of these writing workshop videos. And for this one, I wanted to talk about story, for which you could also think plot. They don't always mean the same thing. But this question of sort of how do we make things happen? I think it's, in my experience, one of sort of the biggest questions for a lot of fiction writers. You can explore your character, and you can brainstorm, and you can think about conflict. But how do you actually get a story kind of up and moving? How do you get things happening? Where are you surprising the reader? How are you, pacing things out, or creating an interesting journey for the reader? How are you just sort of answering that, like, what happens next question, where sometimes we might feel like we're running into a brick wall with a piece. I think also sometimes writers feel like people are holding out on them with a lack of story or plot advice. And I'll just say, I think it's partly because really different things work for different people. I personally am not a big outliner. Every time I think I've got something planned with sort of, dramatic beats, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and these people will converge here, I realize partway through writing that I'm wrong. And that original conception is just not going to feel organic. It's going to feel forced, or it's going to feel less interesting than what I realize are ultimately the possibilities of the piece. So this is story advice coming at you from somebody who tends to really just kind of feel my way through, and does have to kind of pause and say, well, okay, what next? What next? What next? And I think one of those ways that you can think about story that is a little bit more loose and organic than strict plotting is borrowing from the writer George Saunders. He has an essay in The Brain Dead Megaphone, which is most of the essay is a very, very close reading of a short story called The School by Donald Barthelme, which you can find online and read the piece. But he has an extended metaphor where he talks about Hot Wheels tracks and says basically, a story is made of things that fling our little car forward. Depending on what kind of Hot Wheels you buy, you end up with little kind of launchers or little gas stations or little, battery operated wheels that push your car forward. And, as you are building a piece of writing, whatever it is, whether it's a fast-paced thriller or something much slower or more contemplative, are there still gas stations, those Hot Wheel gas stations or launchers of some kind? And those don't have to be, a murder or a shocking discovery. Those moments can just be a kind of nagging question that we might have about a character. They can be somebody that we're really rooting for and we really want things to turn out okay for them. And the gas stations are the little moments where we're like, oh no, like, the gas stations might be moments where a character is coming to a greater understanding of themselves, or backing away from a certain understanding of themselves. Just really think of those launching moments as loosely as you can. Just something that is posing a question to the reader, something that is getting the reader's attention, something that creates some kind of promise that it will be fulfilled, that we're going somewhere, that we are going somewhere interesting. So you want to look for those gas station moments, but a gas station moment is not necessarily conventionally like exciting in terms of plot. It can be much more quiet, it can be much more character based. Another way to think about sort of doubling of tensions, different types of urgency that you can create in a piece of writing. This is from another book of essays by the writer Benjamin Percy. And he's got a whole chapter on urgency and how you create a sense of excitement in the reader. And he's got lots of advice, but one of the things I wanted to pull out here is the idea of lower order goals, scene by scene. Lower order goals drive your scenes. Stacy needs to get to the store to buy beer. Johnny needs to sneak out. Sam needs to hammer plywood over the windows before the hurricane arrives. There's a very clear ticking clock drama there. Think of these as micro finish lines, something for the readers to constantly race toward. Any marathon runner knows that their goal is to cross the finish line. They keep their desire piqued by 1,000 tiny accomplishments that add up to a victory. I think personally, another reason why sometimes writers, we get ourselves into knots over plot is that, we can think that every scene is having to feed this larger arc and larger journey. And they do. We're not wrong. But you also want to think about, what else is going on in this scene. If a scene exists only for, the detective to deliver big news to the suspect or vice versa, if you are only gathering people where they can hash out their plot or their dastardly plot to take over the world, maybe that's information that's best revealed or received off stage altogether. If your scenes are sort of relentlessly just about that larger action, that's going to feel really forced really quickly, usually. So think about these moments where somebody is just like making a sandwich. They need to get that sandwich made. Presumably they're hungry. What are we learning about that character in the way that they make a sandwich? Who are they talking to while they make that sandwich? What are they talking about? Are they talking really directly about whatever the larger issues are at hand? Are they talking about anything except the larger issues? Are these people dancing around each other? Are they talking past each other? Are they listening to each other? What kind of sandwich? Were the right ingredients in the house at the right time? Is this a sandwich that's being ordered at a deli and we're with employees? What is the short-term payoff that we need to get to, where somebody has something they need to do? And then how does that payoff tie into these larger questions about our sandwich maker, about their job, about their life, about their love life, about their identity, about whatever else it is that we might be curious about or that the book or story might be unpacking. This was not, this idea of sort of lower order goals paired with, I'm going to say, higher order goals. It wasn't something that I was consciously thinking about when I wrote a particular passage in my novel, The Vexations. But it's something that I looked at once it was done and sort of realized that was something that I was trying to work with in that particular scene. So I'm going to make this short. I don't want to go on too much of my own stuff here. But just to set the scene here, we're partway through the novel. The novel is based on the life of Eric Satie, the French composer, where here he is in Montmartre in Paris. The year of the scene is 1891. Eric has agreed to be a substitute accompanist for a cabaret performance by Aristide Bruant, whom you have seen in various posters like this by Toulouse-Lautrec with the big hat and the giant red scarf. He was famously kind of one of the first insult comics. He gave a very, for the time, very kind of racy show, very kind of aggressive humor, really kind of shook down the audience for money throughout the evening, and had a certain reputation. Eric's training is a mishmash of classical and cabaret music, and he has ended up in way over his head in terms of the style of performance that Bruant is expecting of him. He's done one set, it's gone really badly, and he has friends and family in the audience here for the second, which he's now feeling embarrassed about. So this is just a little bit of the Vexations. Eric finishes Philippe's beer and walks back to the piano like a man headed to the guillotine. As the rest of the seats fill, he studies the folder of music as if it will help him. He wants to announce to the audience that he's really quite well liked at his regular gigs at the Auberge and the Chat Noir, where the singers have learned to give him their music ahead of time. He's never too drunk to play. Perhaps because he's often operating at the edge of his own confidence, he's patient, quick to adjust his volume to a nervous voice or circle back for a missed entrance. If an audience member gets too nasty, Eric will shame him from the stage. He writes original songs and lets performers sing them for free. At first, the two songs were too odd and soft for anyone to bother, but they've been getting brassier, sassier. Most remarkably, Eric has never tried to sleep with any of the performers. Yet he knows that Bruant would be unimpressed by this list of achievements. Once the seats are full and the first round of drinks served, Bruant takes the stage and nods his head at Eric. Eric's fingers, positioned on the keys for the opening of Le Mirliton, tremble slightly. The expectant silence is nearly complete. The only sounds are the rustlings of clothing, a few scattered coughs, glasses being set gently on the table. Eric clatters in with the opening chords, and Bruant, full of glorious contempt, screws up repeatedly so he can blame Eric. The audience batters him with laughter. During the roll call of classics, Bruant throws in some extra names, Massenet and Liszt and Bach. It's Eric's one chance in the show to look competent, and he milks it for all it's worth. Louise, this is his sister, has the musical skill to appreciate what he's doing, and he imagines he's playing his medley of classics for her. He can tell Bruant is about to move on to the next bit, and Eric can't let this chance at the Mirliton go by. He yells out his own name. What he plays is the wrong song for the room, for the mood, the moment. But whatever he plays will enrage Bruant, and this is his favorite of his compositions. It's 3 years old and still his favorite, which sometimes frustrates him. Why hasn't he surpassed himself by now? So the section goes on to talk about the piece, which is he's playing the Gymnopédie number 3. It is indeed serene and unashamedly pretty. And this is the first page of it here. And it remains the most famous thing he ever wrote. He wrote these 3 short piano pieces as a very young man. They were not a commercial success at the time. They weren't particularly well noticed at the time. And he went on to have a really long career with a lot of different paths. He was famously eccentric in both his work and his personal life. And now, nearly 100 years after his death, these pieces are the ones that most people know him for. I first learned these as a piano student. A lot of people do. Even if you don't think you've heard this piece, you absolutely have. In the background of a commercial or a TV show or a movie or playing at an airport or somewhere. And at that particular moment in the book, Eric obviously doesn't know what's going to happen after he's dead, but does not know that this is a big chunk of his artistic legacy. For that moment in the book, he's a young guy. He's in way over his head. He's just having this humiliating night where it has become, I survive the gig, survive the gig. Try and figure out, is there anywhere to like leave with a shred of your dignity intact? Which is happening when Bruin sort of gives him the opportunity to play, this collage of classics. So he just professionally, he's humiliated and wants to just kind of make it to the end and slink off. He wants to get paid because he is excruciatingly broke at that point in his life, but really for his entire life, this was true. In my imagining of the scene, the broke thing is true, the Genopody stuff is true, the scene is imagined. He has family members in the audience with whom he has a very complicated relationship and a pretty distant relationship, and one where he wants them to come, and part of his humiliation is that the evening is going the way it's going, and it's going that way in front of his family, in front of his siblings. So it's one particular night that is just, it's a bad night in the career of our hero, and it's also a night that is bad partly because it plugs into and reflects so many of these other anxieties he has about his art, about his ambition, about the family relationships, the personal relationships that he really struggles to navigate, and some of which sort of get left along the way as he tries to make it as a composer. So that sense of sort of, just paragraph by paragraph, what's happening. What does your character want? What's pulling us through? And then what do they want in the larger scale? What do they want out of their relationships? What do they want out of their own ambition? Can they recognize their own ambition? Do they recognize what they want? And those are all things that certainly I found myself thinking a lot about with this character, because he was a prickly guy. He was a challenging character. And those were all things that showed up in that particular scene. So, your mission, writing exercise. Again, you could do this now, do this later, however you want to handle this. Write a scene that contains both a lower order goal and a higher order goal. So lower order possibilities, I had said like make a sandwich, survive the gig, survive the audition, get the part. Get your car. Somebody could be working on a car or just trying to like get an open pump at a gas station. Pick out a new shirt, make it home before curfew. Get across the room before time runs out and floor is lava. Make a 10-layer wedding cake you promised to make for a friend, even though your baking skills aren't that great. So this could be something that should be very much within the capabilities of your character. It's something that's maybe totally routine, but something gets in the way, or it could be something that the character understands to be ambitious. It could be something really ordinary, or it could be something a little more special, like your one moment on a competitive TV show. Think about what higher order goals your character might have that are being reflected in this scene or in their actions. So on Floor is Lava, you might get a family team talking about like, oh, it's our last chance to really do something before the kids are off to college, or it's a group of old friends reuniting. Maybe you just need to gas up the car to see somebody in this really sort of a high stakes interaction, whether it's a good interaction or a sad one. That poor person who's decided to try and make this wedding cake, are they trying, what would possess someone to attempt this? Are they trying to salvage a friendship, forging a new one? Have they struggled with keeping friends? Is this something that does not come naturally to them? And this cake is the grand gesture that they're hoping seals the deal. If that's the case, why have they struggled with friendships? What degree of self-knowledge or self-awareness do they have about the situation? Do they understand why they've agreed to make this cake? Are they lying to themselves about why they've tried to make this cake? How accurate is their understanding of their own cake baking abilities? And at what point will there maybe be a reckoning about their ability to do this or not? That sense of sort of big picture stuff. You can open your scene with a very clear kind of symmetrical sense of, here's what my character wants now, here's what my character wants, 10 years from now, and both these things are going to dovetail together. You can start a scene just saying like, all right, dude needs to fill up his tank, and here we are at a gas station, a literal gas station. And then just kind of see as you listen to that character and write that scene, what else is happening? What else does this person want? What avenues have I given myself for interaction? What might happen else during the scene? Who else might this person interact with? What could go wrong? Fiction is made out of things going wrong, out of conflict, out of mistakes, out of decisions that don't look like mistakes in the moment the character makes them. But farther down the line, maybe the character comes to see it differently. So this can be something you approach in a sort of schematic way. This can also be something that you just write your way into and figure out where you want it to go. But by the end of the exercise, you should have a scene where a character is trying to cross a mini finish line, but is also engaging in some larger struggle or effort. My email is here if you want to contact me about anything. But just to say a last little tiny thing about that idea of struggle and effort. Again, this does not have to be, you need to go gas up the getaway vehicle because the higher order goal is to rob the bank and make off with the money. What's the money for? What does that character want to do with it? What is that character's relationship with robbing banks? What is this, like a family legacy? Is this something that they are doing happily or less happily or willingly or unwillingly? The struggle or conflict hopefully has, its external elements, has your characters are doing something. They are trying to get something. They are out in the world interacting with real places and people, or real fictional places and people. But is there also an internal element where there is something in them that is driving them to do these things? There are questions that they are trying to work out for themselves. There is some kind of understanding that they're trying to reach. And the book, as those sort of little Hot Wheels launchers, as you have these scenes with these lower order goals that push us forward, push us forward, push us forward. Hopefully our finish line is not just necessarily an event, a bank robbery or a wedding or a funeral, with that sense of finality or conclusion. Hopefully that character is continuing to unfold too. And when we talk about, launchers or story or resolution, it's not just about events. It's also about people. Humans are complicated and contradictory, and one of the great joys of fiction, I think, as a writer and a reader, is exploring that and bringing that to the page. So thanks for watching these. I hope they were useful, and take care. Thanks.